Hello and welcome to LangTime Chat, episode 40.
If you're not looking at the video of this, you should go and look at the video for this.
Or there will be a PDF also
Okay,
available.
because of this incredible font. What font is this?
It is called Lansbury.
Oh, that's right.
And
Oh
it's
my
the
God.
Murder, She Wrote font.
It is the Murder, She Wrote font. Oh, that's right.
I chose it for you.
Thank you. And look, then there's also like the typewriter font.
Exactly, for like a screenplay.
Yeah, because she still uses the typewriter. There's an amusing episode in the first season where she's trying to set up a personal computer. And it's just like, oh my, these modern contrivances. It's wonderful.
And so if you don't know, I don't know how often we mention this in LangTime. David is a Murder, She Wrote fan. And so
We don't mention it enough.
we've mentioned it now, and we have here, whether you call it, we've heard it homage, but also more recently it's been homage in like a couple of things we've watched where we're like, what?
Oh.
What was that? I forget what show we were watching, but they kept saying an homage, and I was
No,
like, is it Top Chef, I think?
No, you can say it. So like you can say something is an homage, but you can also say we did it in homage.
No, well, we heard it in the noun form as an homage, and we were both kind of like,
But the thing is, they're both nouns.
oh, well, then never mind. I just thought it was homage.
Well, like, no, because if you do something in homage of somebody, you generally don't say in homage of somebody. That's so weird. So it's the same noun, it means the same thing, but it's pronounced homage when it's used in the expression in homage. Otherwise, it's homage. And you're right, but yeah, if it's just on its own, it's a little weird to say it's an homage. You know, like, this is an homage. No, I can't even say it. This is an homage to you. No, that just sounds weird.
Also, though, for me, it's the same. Like, so I'm looking at you with this look because
Oh no, I'm pretty sure. Here, you
I don't say it differently, whether it's in homage or an homage.
you look it up. You look it up.
Well, no, David's looking it up. I'm not,
No, I'm
because
sorry.
I'm
What
in
I'm- what I
control
meant-
of the computer.
What I mean is,
Now,
I'm going to look it up. You say what
David,
we're actually talking about today.
we have not yet said the title, and if you're not looking at what we're looking at, then you have no idea. It is Conlang documentation, specifically talking about like what kinds of features, you can put in any written grammar of your language. And David's still looking up this whole homage business. And so I'm going to go on and just pretend like we are still on track.
No, like you go for it. Like I think it's great. I think this is a great topic. I can't wait to talk about Conlang documentation.
Okay, well, y'all have seen our documentation method,
Yes.
which was really David's. And like even now, whenever I do Conlang documentation, I kind of take the same kind of format. I just tweak it to make it my own. But like you've seen what we do in LangTime, and so you've seen our reference grammar and lexicon document, and David even made this template available online. And I know it's in Pages and PDF. I feel like you also like converted it to a Word document and put it up, or maybe you didn't. Because it didn't really convert necessarily, like all the features don't necessarily convert, which is problematic because it's like, one of the things that really makes it helpful for us is all the hyperlinks and things. And if they don't work, then, it's not necessarily as helpful. But this template is available online, and, quick video here, just in case you're like, wow, I've forgotten what this looks like. I put a video in on this page, but like, is it playing? No, there it goes.
Yeah.
There it goes. And so what you're looking at if you're watching the video, and if you're not, if you're listening, then, really it's just scrolling right through the document that
Now it's going fast.
that is the template for what we do for documentation. But yeah, that is, well, once it got to the dictionary and it was just alphabet letters, it was like, why go slow? And so I sped through that part. But yeah, so that's what we do, but that doesn't mean you have to use the same format. So like when you're writing out features of your language, by no means do you have to use our template. Or if you do start with the template, that doesn't mean that you have to like stick to it precisely. You can still make it your own. But some features will make your Conlang documents more helpful to other Conlangers or other linguists whenever they're looking at, what you've written up about your language, to make it more helpful to understand how your language does things.
By the way, just a small dark aside here. The truth is that, the majority of linguists don't really care about our conlangs, but I bet they will when we're dead. So do
Very
the
dark, man.
yeah, but I mean I'm serious. Do the young folks that are eventually going to be studying all of our conlangs a favor, make it easy for them.
Or in David's case, do all of the Italian students writing theses about your languages a favor by documenting them well. Because for whatever reason, there are a lot of students in Italian universities who do their theses
Yep.
on David's languages. And so having good documentation will really help them. All right, so we're going to look at some examples. And I've just taken out screenshots of examples. I see you pointing.
Yeah.
I just put up the slide that says Itlani by Jim Hopkins.
And this is worth noting. I know that this is going to come out on June 1st. And so
This will have been up for a whole month.
it will have been up for a whole month. But Itlani, Jim just put up his Itlani quick grammar on Fiat Lingua. It's the May 1st, 2023 Fiat Lingua entry. And so you can download and look at the whole thing.
And that's especially helpful because if you're a longtime Itlani fan, you may remember that at one point there was a website that gave you a lot of information about Itlani and the structures of it. But for whatever reason, it's not there anymore. And it may just be server error or moving hosts, whatever. And so when I had noticed that, I said something to David, and David reached out to Jim, and Jim was so kind to respond with, here's a grammar you can put up on Fiat Lingua. And so I personally was excited about that. And so, check out Fiat Lingua, the Itlani grammar by Jim Hopkins. So the first note I'm going to say is that charts are good. Charts are good. I love me some charts. I really do. David does too, maybe a little bit more than I do even. Maybe. Tables.
Tables, yes.
Charts, tables, it's the same.
Tables, yes. Charts, no.
Anyway.
I'm kidding. No,
anyway.
They're great.
And so here's an example that I'm showing where it's Itlani cases. And Itlani has, I think it's 9. That's what I'm thinking off the top of my head, but now I'm counting.
10.
Oh. In my head, it was 9 because the last 2 overlap, but they're used in such different varieties that they would never actually be meaningfully confused. So in my head, there were 9 different suffixes, but you're right, there are 10 cases. And so here, Jim has just made, it's honestly a very simple table, but it's so cleanly laid out that you can very easily look at it. In one column, it's the cases, the 10 cases of Itlani, so nominative, accusative, genitive, etc., all the way down to vocative. In the next column, it's the meaning for each case. And this is really helpful, especially if you go into some more specific cases. So the ablative here is defined as from, out of, by, whereas the locative is defined as place and time or space. And so giving that little meaning of how it's generally applied can be helpful. And then after that, there are just 2 more columns because in Itlani, the case suffixes in this, in this instance, of course, your case markers may be prefixes or maybe clitics or maybe completely separate words that come before or after the noun. In this case, though, there's suffixes and there are singular and plural forms. And so there are, for each one, it just shows the suffix for each form. So again, very simple table, but when you look at it, you're really quickly able to see all the information, and it's really nicely laid out.
Cool.
And so that, by the way, I also wanted to show this because sometimes we go over the top with our chart and table formatting. And I just want to show that like it doesn't have to be over the top. It can actually
Yeah.
be really straightforward and
Oh,
super helpful.
before we leave this chart, I also want to make a note because we see something here with Itlani that you also see with Finnish, and I want to comment on two different ways to present it. So, as Jesse mentioned, there are these two different cases, the prepositional and the vocative, that have the same exponents. That it means that they have the same singular and plural, or they're associated with the same singular and plural suffixes. There's no difference. However, there are two very distinct meanings. So the prepositional is used with non-local prepositions, whereas the vocative is used for direct address. These are two very different uses, and you'll never confuse the two. And so one way to do that is that Jim has separated them out into two separate rows that happen to have the same exponents, and he's got an asterisk on the vocative where he's likely explaining why they're the same.
He has.
The other thing to do is that Finnish used to have two different cases, the accusative and the genitive. One of them was associated with an M suffix, the other one with an N suffix. A historical sound change rendered all word final M's to become N's, and so now the cases are identical. However, there are two very different cases, the accusative and the genitive, and there's really no word that I can think of that covers both, especially with a language like Finnish that has so many cases. And so it really just doesn't make sense to pretend that they're just one case with one function. What they do is they usually present it in one row, and it's presented as the accusative / genitive plus an asterisk explaining.
And I know, so Finnish does that. Also, if you look up Venedig by Jan van Steenbergen, nominative and accusative have merged. And so, same thing though, in the chart, it'll be nominative / accusative with in one row. And then I believe after that, it's only genitive and dative. I think there's only those cases. But anyway, but yeah, same thing where it's like if they merge, there's no reason to give two different rows necessarily, but like you also need to give them both their same, both their labels, so that way other people reading it can understand how they would use it. Very cool. Examples are a necessity. So charts are great. And like one thing that I've seen in Conlang documentation is that sometimes people think the chart says everything you need to know and then like that's it. But like example sentences really showcase how you want these to be used in your language. And they can also showcase how they attach to stems, perhaps slightly differently. Because sometimes what happens is like it looks like this if it's a vowel, or this like if it's attached to a consonant. And like being able to actually show those examples is huge. And so for instance, after the Itlani chart, you come across like little descriptions of each case and how it's used. And here I've just taken a screenshot from the page describing the accusative case in Itlani. And so in the overall description, there is like, this opening prose, like the direct object takes the ending of the accusative case. Perfect. The accusative case is required for objects of verbs. In the singular, it's ova, sometimes o. In the plural, it's ovo. And so you get that note, and then that's followed by two examples. And what I really, really like, what Jim did here, was he used two different sentences, but with the same nouns in different cases. And so the first one is, let me take that away for a second. The queen met the young man. The second one is the young man met the queen. And so really what he's doing is like, what would this noun look like in its bare form? Because the nominative singular is unmarked in Itlani. What does it look like in accusative? So here we can see the queen is ta darel. But when it's in accusative, it's ta darelova. So you get the ova. Darelova. My tongue did not want to do that R in there.
Darelova?
Yeah, my tongue did not want to do that. There were like 3 different alveolar consonants in a row, and it was just like done. And so that you can see that accusative case actually coming to shape. And then on the flip side, because the young man is used again both in the nominative and accusative in these examples, you can see that ta malachor is the young man. But then in the accusative, when it's the queen met the young man, now it's ta malachorova.
Yeah.
I should really check the stress before I try to say these examples out loud. And I'm sorry, Jim, if you ever hear this episode. I'm really sorry if I'm completely mispronouncing this.
I guarantee the second one was pronounced wrong. But
Can you do it for me?
I don't know. My guess is Malachorova. But I wouldn't be super surprised to see Malachorova, sorry. But I would be stunned to find a Malachorova. That would be, I don't think that's it. Anyway, but I want to say 3 things about this.
Mm-hmm.
I see you giving me that look.
Mm-hmm.
It is the lookiest of looks you're giving me.
And getting lookier by the minute.
Okay, there were 3 things I wanted to say. Number 1 is examples are great, but also good examples are great. And I will say this from experience. Both Jesse and I have seen Conlang grammars in particular, where it was like, say you're doing the accusative case and the example sentences are, the queen met the young man, the next one is the boy threw the rock, and then the next one is like the wolf ate the meat. And it's like 3 different verbs, 6 different nouns. And so it's like, it doesn't really tell you anything. These 2 examples from Jim are better than the 3 examples I just gave you, because they're complete in that, the verb stays the same, the nouns change position, and so you can see something for both of them. If you're changing up the words for every single example, it doesn't tell you anything, or at least anything important. You need to be able to see the change happening, and the examples like this will do that for you. And by the way, I should mention, it's not Conlang grammars that are just guilty of this.
Oh, no. And the only reason I didn't make it more generic in the advice is that I'm assuming if you're listening to this, you're probably working on your own Conlang grammar rather than trying to do a write-up of a NatLang. However, if you are doing a write-up of a NatLang, same principles apply. Because honestly, anytime you approach a grammar of a language, whether it's a NatLang or Conlang, you're really looking for the same kinds of information.
And linguists doing work on understudied languages are going to run into this probably more than anybody else. Because often what will happen, and like this happened with a language we were studying at UC San Diego, there was only 1 grammar written on this language. It was written in the 1960s. It was written by 2 missionaries who didn't have a very good understanding of linguistics. And you would see things like this, where, it'd be 2 examples, just radically different words, and you're having to guess what the phenomenon is. Or sometimes just 1 example with brand new words where you can't even figure out, what the heck is going on. And so it's like less than useful. Of course, less than useful. It's like... it's like more help than it does hurt. It hurts more than it helps. Anyway, sorry. So that was one thing. Second thing was, there were 3 distinct things. That was one of them. Yeah. Well, I don't remember the third distinct thing. It was pretty good, but it was good, important, and relevant. But anyway, this thing though is that I will tell you from experience. Like when I was a graduate student, I remember my second quarter I was taking optimality theory, and that was the first time it was Professor Eric Bakovich, who we'd do write-ups and everything. We'd present OT tables and tableaus, what they're called. And I would, especially at the beginning, I was getting comments back where it's like, I have this table and, the comment is, this is just a table. There's no explanation. And I was really frustrated by this. Of course, I was young, but I was like, the table just shows it to you. Why do I have to explain it? That's redundant. I think it is much easier to understand this if you approach it as a reader, because this is something that I've hit upon a time and time again looking at Conlang grammars. You have to think about it as a reader. Like sometimes, yeah, a table does tell you everything that you need to know, but it's also a table. It's kind of like you look at it, you don't there's not necessarily a beginning or end. You don't necessarily know which part is important. It might not jump out to you. It's much more obvious to the person making the table than it is the person reading the table for the first time. So no, the prose is vital, vital. And it's the type of thing where it's like if I'm producing something for somebody else to look at, you know, you can throw together tables pretty quickly and you can make them look great and make them look very attractive, but I don't feel good about it. Like, it's fine for us, assuming that we don't forget, you know, but if the moment that you want somebody else to look at it, suddenly I feel it. It's like I don't feel good about it because it's like, okay, yeah, the tables are there, but they don't say anything. You have to write it down, otherwise you're not going to get it. And reading the grammars, that is something that made it clear to me, clearer than anything else.
Yeah. I also want to point out that if you were paying attention in the description before we started talking about the examples, there's this note that sometimes the ending for the accusative singular is O. And that's, whoops, I thought I did another orange highlighting. Below these two example sentences, Jim goes on to explain that, to say, like, there are colloquial sayings where the accusative singular just shows up as O in expressions like, you know, bon appetit, where instead of getting a full ova, you get an O at the ending of draputo, which means good appetite. Or like in the phrase welcome, you get karimo instead of karimova. And so
I did remember, and this one was important. The other reason that this explanation is important, right now we're looking at cases, right? And cases is a good place where it becomes clear why this is important. We have all of this case terminology, but no two cases are the same in any two languages. Similarly to the way that no two words are the same. Like we know, like, you know, English paper means what it means. Spanish papel means what it means. They both mean paper a lot of the time, but paper is used in ways that papel is not, and vice versa. And that's why, you know, if you really want to explain it, you have to write it all out. Same thing with cases, same thing with tenses. So there are two things at play here. One is that the accusative case in some language may not work the same as it does in another. Two, as a conlanger, your understanding of that terminology may be different. This is where that's going to become clear.
Yeah.
But like a nice, simple example is that, like, the locatives, let's say in High Valyrian, that's the basic case you use with generic anything. It's like it's there, right? The in Finnish has two cases: the inessive, which is usually used to mean inside of something, and it has the adessive, which is a somewhat basically identical to the locative. Knowing.
Side note, they're actually identified in grammars as having 6 locational cases, because there's the internal and external locational cases, and so that's the inessive and adessive.
Right. But like, just with those case titles, the inessive and the adessive, most people would assume the adessive is more common because it's more generic, whereas being inside of something is more specific. And it couldn't be more the opposite in Finnish. The inessive case is used way more often than the adessive. And there's just no way that you would know that just by putting up the table and saying, here are the forms. You need that extra explanation to get that. Otherwise, you need to look at a whole bunch of corpora or get a whole bunch of sentences. That's what these explanations are good for. To tell you, it's because the names of the cases or the names of the tenses, they don't tell you the whole story for how your language works.
And one thing that the chart would not have told you if Jim had stopped at the table, the locational case, or the locative case rather, the locative case in Itlani never appears on its own. It always has a preposition with it.
Oh.
But like the preposition differs.
Wow,
it may
I
be
didn't know
at,
that.
it may be in, it may be on, whatever it is. But the only time you actually see the locative case is really on the object of the preposition.
Yeah, I never would have guessed that.
And
And
so
so if I was trying
that
to
was
make an Atlani sentence, I would have just used the locative.
well, yeah,
Yep.
that's why it was super important. And of course, if you read the Atlani grammar, you'll see a note about that, and you'll see examples.
Cool.
Okay, so another example grammar here is Doug balls, and is this scare, or scare? Like, do you know how that R is pronounced?
He pronounces it in English scare,
Really?
sometimes scara, but it's got a little bit of a different name in the language itself.
Okay, so scare or scara
Yeah.
is Doug Ball's language. And we're going to talk about the importance of showing the same word in different forms, which is something that Jim had done, but I want to highlight that again because it is really important. Like David said, if every word is different in every example, it can be hard to really understand how the forms work overall. And so in an example segment where Doug is describing in Scara how like tense mood aspect works in the language, specifically looking at like example sentences like she is running versus she will run versus run or she ran. Doug gives that example, like specifically using the same verb each time. And so that way you can see run in all of the different markings. So that way you can start seeing that, okay, like, really, I believe it's ahor is the root, or ahor. I'm not sure how that R is pronounced yet.
It's a flap.
Flap. Okay, so ahor is the root meaning run. If you have the imperfective, it's a prefix, he, with a glottal stop, so he ahor. The like kind of future, the potential, like could happen, is the prefix a, so with a glottal stop, e ahor. But then ahorin, and so here we have ahor showing up first. The in is like a perfective marker at the end. That means she ran. And then the imperative is just the root. Ahor. Ahor. But it's really helpful that Doug used the same example throughout, because if he hadn't, like, you wouldn't necessarily, you could read the prose and figure out like, oh, okay, Doug explains that this is like the prefix, this is the suffix, but like you wouldn't be able to really glance at the examples and figure anything out about the language because all the roots would be different. And like it wouldn't stand out as like, aha, here's the pattern that I need to be working with. Yeah. And so it helps, again, to show the same kinds of forms in different contexts, especially when you're just describing them. Later, you can give a lot more diversity in form, and we'll talk about that as well. But like when you're describing and trying to show examples, it could be really helpful to just set up these paradigms to run it through, show how it works in all these different ways.
Cool.
Did you have anything to add to that?
I did, but I lost it. But this brings back a lot of memories. I worked with Doug's language a lot back then, and so it's like I remember all of these forms. It's really nice. But I would say just the main thing, it's like it really helps to read somebody else's grammar to know what information you would want. Because it's so easy to forget this if you are working with your own language, which you know very well, especially for early conlangers, because generally they only have one and they just feel like they know everything about it, and so they forget the things that others will not be able to guess. Yeah.
That is very true. As another example section, I'm looking at the negation in the same verb kind of area in the Scara grammar. And in the negation, again, using run as the verb, you can continue seeing the ahor root show up over and over again. And then Doug really explains it in prose first to say, for example, clausal negation is signaled with the preverbal particle koni. Then you get the example sentence, koni ahorin, she didn't run. So here you're seeing ahorin, which was that perfective form that we had seen earlier. And here you're seeing it then with that negation marker. So that way you can see she didn't run, how that works. And then there's another example where Doug says any subject marker that appears in a negative clause must appear attached to the negative particle, not the verb, which is, of course, super important to know. And so, for instance, in she didn't run, there was no overt, subject marker. In this sentence, though, koni ha hi ahor is I am not running, where that imperfective hi ahor form is used that we had already seen up above. And then here, koni ha is not just koni, the negation particle. Now it has a suffix ha to indicate a first-person subject.
Doug's language is so good.
I am not running. And then also there's a completely different negative particle if it's a command form. So koni is the one we've seen so far, but rone is the negation of a command form. So if you want to say don't run, you don't say koni ahor, you say rone ahor. And that means essentially it's prohibited. Just like that. And so again, not only was it that Doug used the same forms that were introduced earlier and ran it through, but remembered to point out that koni ahorin doesn't require a subject marker, but hey, if there is a subject, it actually attaches, to the negative particle. And that was a really important note. And you may be surprised how often people forget to mention that kind of thing. And so that was really nice. All right. So now we're going to get into some more obscure examples.
Oh, yeah.
All from Fiat Lingua.
Oh, yeah.
And so this one is Tunnel by Harry Cook. And I think this one I think it's been within the last year. It may be 2 years. I think I ended up going back 2 or 3 years in the archives of Fiat Lingua to pull examples for the next sets. And so I can't remember exactly when this was posted, but it is on Fiat Lingua. And one of the things I wanted to point out, one of the features, was that it's really good to show a variety of relevant examples. And so it's yes, show us the same word in different contexts to help us understand the form. But if the entire grammar only gave run as the verb or only gave, queen as the noun, you would never know how any other words in the language work. And so don't forget to showcase those examples, really describe them, but then also introduce a variety. And so, for instance, when Harry Cook is writing about prosody in tunnel, so specifically here stress, there are 3 example words given. And in these example words, we have yazan, which is sun, leyokun, which is wine, leyokun, and punorai, which is chair, punorai.
Ponvorai. It's a V.
Oh, I thought that was interesting.
It
was
was
my
a trick.
brain.
No, I know why. It's because of the O next to it.
And so you're going to see I made a little mistake on the next slide because my brain so interpreted that as a vowel that I thought it was a diphthong. Anyway, so in these 3 examples, what Harry Cook is really showing is that stress is always on the initial syllable. Okay. So what's nice here, though, is that some syllables are open syllables with monophthongs. There are no diphthongs because that was a V and not a diphthong. So whoops. Oh, my brain. But then
It's
also
a modification, though.
It really is. And then also there are closed syllables. And so to show that it's it doesn't matter whether it's a light or heavy syllable, it doesn't matter how many syllables there are, the the stress is going to be on the first syllable. And so it's you get different lengths of words, you get kind of different syllable types. And so I think it could have even gone further. It could have been pushed further with say a closed syllable being the first syllable and an open syllable, kind of mix matching the ordering that you get them. But I think it is still really nice that you saw that no matter how many syllables you add, whatever types they are, stress is going to be on the first syllable. And that's important. Also, it's really important if you say that stems behave differently, it's really important to show examples to show how they behave differently. And the number of times I've seen tables where it's sometimes this, sometimes that, and then there's no examples or explanations. It doesn't really help. And so that doesn't help me understand the features of the language. And so, looking still at the Tamil grammar, there are a lot of different mutations that get applied. But it like depends on the sounds that follow and so on. And so there's a chart that is provided, or a table, whatever you want to call it, where it's like different consonants and then what they look like if they change for palatal mutation, if they have like a soft form or hard mutation form, or whatever the case is. So Harry notes that mutations don't always affect every word beginning with a certain sound. And so the same word can cause different mutations on the following word. And if that were the end of the story, that would not be helpful, but there are examples provided. So for example, ayo causes type 4 mutation, which means a word beginning with a T could become an S or a theta or not change at all. And what really matters is the sound after it. So here, ayo sorime, you get that T turning into an S because torim is to run away.
I think it's torim.
Torin.
And so eyo sorime.
Ayo sorime. That's right. Stress on the initial syllable.
That, but also vowel quality. For some reason, using the acute accent to indicate
To do
minus
the
ATR.
Yeah.
Which is a mistake. Should be.
Should be a grave accent.
Yeah.
Oh, David has his opinions. Tiune or tiune is to draw.
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly.
Tiune. Yep.
But if you want to say I drew a woman, you're going to get eo tiune. And so that's the I drew part. So you're going to get that theta. Versus tus is to hit, and sueotus. So you get that eotus, that I hit part. So the T doesn't change because it's the U that follows.
Huh. Interesting.
And so, yeah, you get examples. Again, could deal with some more explanation to really go into some of those vowels that trigger it versus others that don't. But at the same time, there are examples. I see them. I wouldn't necessarily be able to predict them on my own, but it is nice to have examples of each. P.A. Lewis created Yaje language.
I guess.
David's not sure.
That's how I would pronounce it. Yaje.
Now, one really unfortunate thing about the Lansbury font
is that there's extra space between the capital letter and the...
No.
Oh.
Is that accent marks cannot be used.
Ah.
And so this one, both E's at the end of the word yaje, which is spelled Y-A-J-E-E, both of those E's should have accent marks, the acute.
Okay.
And so I couldn't though. And what's really funny is that you know how like in a font that doesn't have what, the symbol you're looking for, usually what happens is it triggers a shift to like some basic font.
Uh-huh.
This didn't. So whoever made the font was like, I don't want it to let you use another font style or whatever. Instead, it created a giant bullet point.
Oh, well, that means what they did is they took that Unicode point where that character should be and they put a bullet point on it on purpose.
Well, they must have done that to everything because then I tried. I was like other accent marks and other things.
Oh,
Somebody went through and put a whole bunch of bullet points in that font.
It's really easy with copy and paste.
Well,
and
anyway.
I've been guilty of that.
Anyway, which I mean is fine because I wouldn't have wanted a different font there anyway. But like it just cracked me up because I'm like, of all things not to have an accent mark feels like one of the most basic things that you should still have.
Yeah, because especially like on Murder, She Wrote, you could have guest appearances from characters from names from Canada or France or something. You'd want the basic set.
Canadians.
Yeah, you'd want the basic set of accent marks.
Because even a name like Renee, some people who are American spell it with an accent mark.
What I would do is I would just take the accent mark from another font and then put it in a new font window and just hover it over.
So instead, I was like, I'll just remember to say something. I did not do all that work. Okay, cool. So Yaje is a language by P.A. Lewis. Again, grammar is up on Fiat Lingua if you're interested. Can't say enough how important it is to show examples when stems or affixes behave differently. And so I've noted that again. So that this gets noted multiple times. So here there's a section on noun forming derivation saying that the prefix ha or hey, when it's preceding a word beginning with a high vowel, creates a noun meaning place of X, where X is the original noun or verb. And so here there are examples. So mar means mother, hamar means motherland, ku means new, hegu means new land, heri means life, and haheri means field.
Huh.
And so here it precedes a word with a high vowel, not beginning with, but with a high vowel. And so you get that hey trigger change in front of the E, but not in front of the ah or the a. And so you get ha in those cases. So, like a slight little shift should be done in that prose, but like it's nice to have those examples.
Also, if your only example was the second one, to be new is gu with K, and then new land is hegu with a G. And so that would be, I think, a confusing example if that were your only example. Because you'd be like, what? First of all, you didn't show an example where it doesn't change to hey. Second of all, you got this K changing to a G. Why is that happening? So here what you can see is like, okay, clearly that's some other thing. And here are a couple of other examples. It'd actually be nice to see a hey example without any other change, but that's good.
I gotta change. All right, another grammar up on Fiat Lingua.
Who's this
Lingua. Lingua. Did you hear that? Fiat Lingua?
Mm-hmm.
Fiat Lingua is Kala by Carl Buck.
And by the way, what does that mean in Finnish, Kala?
Fish.
Very good. What's it mean in Kamakawi?
Fish.
No, it means to talk.
To talk. And that is also known as fishing. Boom. Okay. Okay. I just did that. All right. So Carl Buck, who worked with David to create Sangeli for Halo, has his own languages, including Kala. And in the grammar of Kala, one thing I want to pull out that was a cool feature was that it's good to demonstrate language use with an original text. In an original text for that language, because a lot of times like you see like the Babel text or
North
like
Wind of the Sun.
the human rights declaration, and it's like
useless.
And those can be like, if you're going to be comparing translations across languages, that can be a really interesting thing. But if you give an original text that's meant specifically for the language, I feel like get so much more, not only because you're really being sensitive to like what vocabulary is going to be there and what would be talked about on a daily basis for the people, but like it gives you a way to really showcase, different examples. And so here, I'm going to read this in English because I love this little text that Carl provides. And so I'm not going to read it in Kala. I don't want to embarrass myself, or if, Carl sees this, I don't want him to just shake his head at me. And so I'm going to read the English translation that's provided here. But this little text example is like one of the funnest little fables. Unless this is really just a translation of a fable, I don't know. Is it one of Aesop's fables?
It is.
Never mind, it's not an original text. I'm going on and on about this wonderful original text.
Yeah, but I don't remember.
I had never heard this one.
Yeah, but go ahead.
A scorpion was walking along the bank of a river, wondering how to get to the other side. Suddenly he saw a fox. He asked the fox to take him on his back across the river, and the fox said, "No, if I do that, you'll sting me and I'll drown." The scorpion assured him, "If I do that, we'll both drown." So the fox thought about it and finally agreed. So the scorpion climbed up on his back and the fox began to swim. But halfway across the river, the scorpion stung him. As poison filled his veins, the fox turned to the scorpion and said, "Why did you do that? Now you'll drown too." "I couldn't help it," said the scorpion. "It's my nature." And so, yeah, it's an Aesop's fable. I really thought this was like something Carl came up with, and I was going to text him and be like, "Oh my God, this is amazing." But it does go to show that it really does show character of the language and complex features that you wouldn't get in example sentences. Because like you're not going to give a lot of example sentences with sentence structures like a scorpion was walking along the bank of a river wondering how to get to the other side. Like That's a lot of complex features
Yeah, it
going on.
is.
And so instead, like putting it in the context of a text, it gives you reason for these complex features. And it really makes you work out features of your language in a way that just straight up example sentences out of context don't.
Also, nice use of formatting here. We have bold and then regular and then italic,
Yeah.
with no line spaces. So it helps to set things off very nicely.
And so, not necessarily an original, but it does showcase features of his language, and I love it. So if you do have an original text, though, you can really show character of your language and again demonstrate more complex features of the language that you're just really not going to get in a lot of those sentence examples that you get throughout the grammar. And so that could be really important. And so some features that are often overlooked, and so these are ones that I think are incredibly important for including in languages, or in language descriptions, I should say, are that sound change descriptions often don't have examples. And so even if...
Really? Can you think of any language
No,
documentation
no,
that
no.
have no examples?
Listen. But here's what I'm saying. There oftentimes aren't even sound change descriptions in general. But if there are, nowhere in the document do you find protoforms. And so you can't, if you're trying to research, how are people coming up with sound changes? How are they applying them? How does it make the evolved form differ? You don't have the protoforms. And so, like, if you want to include, evolved forms in these sound change descriptions, it would really be helpful for other people to see how a protoform, to see like this is a protoform, even if it's just listed in the dictionary, to be like, and then here it is after all these sound changes. That is really helpful. Again, it's only helpful, well, I think it's helpful to yourself too to remember how they changed, especially if you want to like go back and create compounds from the protoforms. And as David knows from past experiences of not writing down protoforms, it's really important when you want to expand the language to remember what the original protoforms were.
Yeah.
And so that's super important. But then, like, not just for yourself, if you want it to be useful for anybody else, being able to actually look at what it looked like in older forms versus modern forms is really important.
But message, note taken, yeah, we should probably throw down some examples when we have our sound changes in our LangTime documents. I get it.
Fair. I've put it out there. Another thing that's often overlooked is documentation to highlight paths of grammaticalization, so showing where the elements came from. And that's something that we have not been good about, but more recently we have been better by actually including a grammaticalization section. So that way we remember where, like, whether it's a prefix, a suffix, or even its own morpheme, but really showing like where they came from.
Falling in love with that word morpheme, aren't you?
Sorry, unit, whatever you want to call it.
How do you even use the word morpheme when we're talking about grammaticalization?
I don't need a lecture.
But, like, that's the whole point.
David's getting a look again. So whatever you call it, show where it came from. Because that can also, it can help not only understand, the evolution with sound changes and things like that, but it's also really helpful for yourself if you're creating, say, a new verb and it ends in something that no other verb in your language ends in yet because you're still in the process of expanding vocabulary. And if you forget where, say, a suffix came from, you may not remember how it should interact at its borders. And so really documenting somewhere what you grammaticalize to become, what markers is very helpful. Another often overlooked feature is providing borderline examples or uses of grammatical features in unique ways. So for instance, quirky case examples where like this verb requires the genitive for its object. It's, all the other verbs use accusative, but this one requires something else. Providing an example like that can then help if later in the dictionary you just put a note like plus genitive. that can really help to like highlight, oh, okay, this verb is going to look like that other one already described up above. And so being able to actually highlight some examples that it's like, hey, for the most part, accusative case works this way, but hey, here's also this like borderline or colloquial, idiomatic, whatever kind of phrase where it works slightly differently. That can highlight just a naturalistic language feature that you have, and that's really cool. Another feature to make sure you don't forget is to provide examples with a diversity of vocabulary. And this is across the whole grammar, because again, like it's good to show those paradigms where you show the same word in different forms. But if at the end of the grammar, you've only given like 3 different nouns and 2 different verbs in the entire grammar in terms of examples, you're limiting what people can learn about your language.
I'm really guilty of not doing this.
I'm pointing my finger at David. Another thing is to provide clear descriptions of complex features. And this is especially as you're getting into kind of syntactic features as they get more complex with, say, participial phrases that are embedded, or like I've seen write-ups of relative clauses that are just really unclear. And one thing I do like about how we do our relative clause examples is it's like, it breaks it down by if it's with a direct object, if it's object of the preposition. So like it really breaks it down to be like, you have to show relative clauses in all these different situations to show how they work. And things like that can really help other people understand how your language was intended to work. So maybe you're looking at all this advice and you're like, I'm just feeling really overwhelmed. I don't know where to start. And so this is where I had an idea that I was really quite excited about. Now I'm excited to tell David about it. Where like, if you're not sure how to sit down and write a grammar, start with a list of features. You can actually use Grambank and its list of features to create an overview of your language. I'm going to show you how.
Okay.
David is confused. And Grambank, by the way, is something we used for our last podcast episode. It's a database, and it's like grambank.clld.org. You can find the database there. And if you go to the features list, you can use that list to create a shareable overview of examples in your language. So for instance, I have a screenshot here of just the first 10 features, 8 features in the screenshot, where it's like, again, these are ones that many of them you will have heard from the last episode, where it's like, are there definite or specific articles? Do indefinite nominals commonly have indefinite articles? So these list of questions, right?
Holy smoke. That's essentially like a on-demand printable version of Thomas Paine's describing morphosyntax.
There you go. That's another valuable resource in understanding how to write grammars, by the way. But it is a whole book, and it is a lot to wade through. This is like a digestible list version.
It's brilliant.
And so I have taken the liberties creating my own little joie feature chart. Of the first 10, I did not do all 195. I'm not there yet.
Wow.
Where it's like I just take those exact features and I put it in a table. So this is just like in a table. You could do it in a spreadsheet. I did it in, did I do it in numbers or pages? Doesn't matter. It's spreadsheet style. Mm-hmm. You could do it in Excel. You could do it in Google Sheets, whatever works best for you. You have a column where it's like, what is the feature? So you just type in the question that Grambank has asked. You may need to read the article to understand the feature, because some of them I was like, what is this even referring to? And so I read the article and then I figured out what it was and I was able to answer the question. Nearly every question is a yes-no question. There is one here that is not, because it's what order does a noun and a demonstrative go in, not a yes-no question. The middle column can just be like usually a yes or a no. And then give examples in another column or do a quick write-up. So for example, in 2 of these, or actually 3 of these really, the feature is absent in Joie, which is my personal Conlang. Even though it's absent, it's good to give an example. So for instance, are there definite or specific articles is the first feature in Grambank? My answer is no. And so instead I do a little write-up saying Joie lacks definite and indefinite articles as demonstrated in this example. And so in the sentence, Pela liriam abazil, that means the or a person collected the or know the wildflowers. And so it's like it can go either way. There are no definite or indefinite articles. And so giving that example really helps. Further down, a question is, are there postnominal articles? The answer is no. And the description is, the only articles that do appear in Schwadi are demonstrative determiners, and they precede the noun. And so it's like, it's still answered. So the feature is not only absent, but it's like, here's why it's absent, basically. And that's really helpful for someone else. If you just say no, that's not always helpful. Mm-hmm. If features overlap, it's cool. You can like actually be like, see this one. So you don't have to keep repeating yourself. And so for instance, the first question was about definite articles. The next one was, do indefinite nominals commonly have indefinite articles? But I've already typed up the fact that there are no definite and indefinite articles. So my answer is see example in feature 20. And so just, refer, do a little reference there. That can also help. Because this is, again, about creating some sort of overview that could be shareable or that could help yourself later on, to be honest. You can give multiple examples if stems behave differently because this is your own table and it can grow as you add examples. And so, for instance, on the feature, what is the order of adnominal, demonstrative, and noun? So in other words, where does the demonstrative occur? My answer is that they're prefixed clitic. And so they go before the noun. However, their forms do change depending on whether they attach to a consonant stem or a vowel stem. And so I give examples of both. So for instance, koduni, this moss, kolanje, this bee, where the ko is this when it's on a consonant stem, but it's kol with an L if it's on a vowel stem. And so I give more examples for that. I have two different distal, visible and non-visible distinction. So giajelu, no, sorry, I did my stress wrong. Giajelu is that ivy that you can see. Giavobi is that mud that you can see. And then aklayaji is that lightning that you cannot see. It's somewhere over yonder. And aklavitu is that mouse.
Wow.
E2 is mouse. And so, again, giving examples where, it behaves differently because consonant vowel stems or whatever reason. Also, doing this chart can highlight areas you haven't considered for your language yet. And one area is that I have not done numbers in Schwadi yet. And so the question is, what is the order of numeral and noun in the noun phrase? I'm pretty sure I know where I'm going to put the number, but I don't have any examples because I don't have any numbers yet in Schwadi. And so I just put a question mark in the answer and left the example area blank. And that's going to let me know later when I look at this that this is an area I need to attend to. And so that's very helpful. And then going on, like sometimes you can use lots and lots of examples. Again, don't be afraid of including examples in your overview because that'll help you later. It'll help anyone else looking at it. And some of these got quite lengthy. So for instance, on the final feature in the screenshot I include is there a gender distinction in independent third person pronouns? And there is in Schwadi, and there are 11 noun classes in Schwadi. And so there are 11 different pronoun forms. And so I give them all. So you see all 11 noun classes with their singular and plural pronoun forms. And if you're wondering, one of the reasons I've left it as 11 different forms is that if I decide to evolve the language more, I'm going to reduce the number. And so I wanted to leave it like full for now and then later potentially reduce it in different ways. So that's why it's like that. And then I also have a lot of examples for whether adnominal property words occur discontinuously, which I had to read that article because I was like, what? Really, it's asking if you have basically like an attributive modifier that's modifying a noun. Does it need to appear either before or after the noun it's modifying, or can it appear elsewhere in the sentence structure? Just as long as it's, usually somehow marked to match it, right? And my answer for Schwadi was no. Like if you have an attributive modifier, it's got to be like somewhere right nearby. But you can actually get two different orders of modifiers in Schwadi. And the unmarked order is for the adjective to appear before the noun, as in like guavayipa, which is smooth ice. and rakye sara, which is rough leaf. But if it's actually an adjective root, you can flip-flop the order, but then you have to mark it as if it has verb agreement. And so ipa iguava is smooth ice still, but it now has that E ice class marker at the beginning of it. And same for sara tarakye. It now has to agree with the noun. Otherwise, it has to be before the noun. And if its root is a noun base, it has to stay before the noun. You cannot move it after. So like chara sara is green leaf, and you cannot reverse that order. And so, anyway. And then this highlighted, I haven't done conjunction and comitative yet. So I don't know. I don't know if that's going to be the same in Jwadi. But anyway, I thought that was a really fun way to tie in Grambank, its features, something we did in the last episode, and to say that, you know, if you don't want to sit down and write a whole grammar, or if you're like kind of scared of that a little bit, just make a table like this and just start typing in what information you want to apply to your language. Start coming up with examples and putting it in. And, you know, it could be a table that you end up filling out over time that then you could, you know, have for yourself in your own reference. But also, if other people want to know about your language, you could share that.
So I'm going to go a step further and say that this could revolutionize conlanging. This is absolutely brilliant. This is a bit like CALS, except that it's much more handheld, and also ordered, and complete for the most part, right? And it can be used both as a Conlang building tool and as a Conlang sharing tool. That's much more effective than even just a grammar. And this is what I think could be done. I think that you create a non-editable Google spreadsheet that has pre-programmed all 195 of them, and, you know, do some color formatting so that you swap between them. It has these columns for yes, no. It has a column for an example, and it has one more column that has a link to the description from Grambank. And then you share it so that conlangers, they can't edit it, but what you can do then is you can copy the spreadsheet and make your own copy of it, and then edit that one. And then anybody can use it, and anybody can do this, and they can share it the same way, and you can just share a link to it.
I was trying to figure out how to make a shareable fill-in form, essentially, because it's something that you can do with Microsoft products, but Apple products you apparently cannot.
No, I would just use Google.
Okay. Ooh, and if David is saying use Google, that's whoa. He's not a fan of the Google suite with writing documents. Otherwise, it's fine.
And it's like you could probably export it to CSV, and then you could open it in anything. You could open it in numbers, or you could open in with Excel.
I would need to, because like one thing that I thought would be really cool was to make it so like the feature column is static, because that's like, it's there. You're not going to change that. The yes, no column could be like a drop down menu.
You can do that.
And then the example column is where it's open to be like, you do this. And I would actually put the link over with the feature, and just like, if you click on the feature, it'll take you to the page.
You could do that. Personally, I would like a separate one. I don't know. You could give it a shot, but yeah, and then it would be great too, not just for the conlanger building it, but also for somebody reading it, because then if it's still opaque, you can just go to the link and see the full explanation.
Yeah,
that's this is something. This is really something.
Well, now I have a little project to do before I release this episode.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's ready by the time I release it. If not,
yeah.
Hopefully soon.
We've also got a project to do. Wow, I bet the Grambank folks never even imagined this.
I would think not. But at least some of the people on the Grambank thing are interested in conlangs. And so I think they'd be excited to know that it could be helpful. And so
yeah,
that's cool.
Wow.
And so anyway, yeah, that was an idea that we will try to help you implement by seeing what I can do with Google Sheets. And I think, I do end on some general advice. So we're just going to wrap up with some general advice here. Keep layouts open and easy on the eyes. If it's all scrunched together and hard to read, oh my goodness. It's just general document formatting, but like some of the things that I have seen for language documentation, it's like my eyes went crossed as I was trying to see everything. It was just all smooshed up.
This is digital real estate. All right, we have to stop thinking about things like we're going to print these things out and
Yeah.
hand our grammars to somebody to read. It's like if you can do your entire Conlang grammar, let's say in 50 pages, and it's all scrunched up with 10-point font, or you could do it in 120 pages and it's nice and easy to read with larger font. Why not do 120 pages? You're not wasting paper. It's
Yeah.
digital real estate.
Yeah.
It's free.
And while you're keeping those layouts open and easy, make those examples that you provide actually stand out from the prose. Like put it down on its own line, tab it in, use bullet points, use fancy bullet points as we have done. Use bold and italic to, signal that this is something to pay attention to. And like that's really important because otherwise it's just hard to read if it's all one big paragraph and like you don't even italicize words as you talk about them because then it's like hard to tell, was that meant to be an English word, was that a typo, was that the language's word? It's a whole thing. Remember charts and tables, they're your friends. Provide them, but don't forget to describe them. And describe your examples so you remember later too.
Yep.
And of course, as I always say in conlanging, the most important thing, have fun. Make examples memorable for you. I mean, you can have some fun with those example sentences. That's why, well, on Duolingo, we've come across, you are crying and the onion is laughing. And I gotta say, I remember that one.
That's right.
So it makes me laugh. So yeah, feel free to have some fun if that makes it more interesting for you. And especially if you're going to provide an original text at the end, you can really have fun with that. And, have screaming goats and all sorts of things show up. And then it makes it more interesting for you too. And so have fun. And with that, do you have any final words?
No, I'm just still kind of awash in this, man. That's just so brilliant.
I'm glad you like the idea.
Yeah.
Okay, so until we talk to you next time, stay grammar. Bye, everyone.
Bye.